In the heart of Sunset Valley, a once peaceful town is shaken by the arrival of the Steel Scorpions, a notorious biker gang that thrives on intimidation and chaos. When Margaret, a 65-year-old war hero and local gas station owner, finds herself at the center of a violent confrontation, she rallies her community to stand up against the growing threat. As tensions rise and alliances are tested, Margaret and her allies must navigate a web of betrayal and fear to reclaim their town. With courage igniting a spark of unity, they embark on an extraordinary journey where bravery clashes with intimidation. Will they succeed in driving out the bikers and restoring peace, or will the shadows of the past continue to haunt them?
Before we continue with the story, you should comment where you are watching from. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. We have another episode for you tomorrow.
Margaret Thompson stood beside her vintage Mustang, the sun glinting off the polished paint. She was a proud woman, a war hero with medals that told stories of bravery and sacrifice. As she filled her car with gas, she felt a sense of peace. The world around her seemed calm, but that calm was about to be shattered. Suddenly, the rumble of motorcycles broke through the quiet. The Steel Scorpions, a notorious biker gang, rolled into the gas station. Their loud engines echoed like thunder, and their leather jackets glistened ominously in the sunlight. Margaret's heart raced as she noticed them eyeing her and her Mustang. She had seen their kind before. Trouble followed them like a shadow. The bikers dismounted, their boots thudding heavily against the pavement. They laughed and shouted among themselves, but Margaret felt an uneasy chill run down her spine. She tried to focus on filling her tank, but every glance toward the gang sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She thought about her medals, symbols of her courage, and wondered if they would mean anything in this moment. The leader of the gang stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Margaret's Mustang. It was a classic car, a beauty that drew attention. He approached with a swagger, his friends following closely behind. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she finished pumping gas. She knew she had to stay calm, panic would only make things worse. As the bikers gathered around her car, they began to make comments that hung heavy in the air. Margaret could feel their eyes on her medals, their curiosity mixed with something darker. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of who she was, a survivor, someone who had faced far worse than this. The tension escalated as one of the bikers reached out to touch the Mustang's hood. Margaret's heart pounded louder now, she could sense trouble brewing. The gang was looking for excitement, and she was standing in their way. She felt a surge of determination rise within her. She would not let fear control her. Just then, one of the bikers shouted something to his friends that made them laugh loudly. The sound echoed around the gas station like an alarm bell ringing in Margaret's ears. She knew she had to act fast, this was not just a casual encounter anymore. With resolve in her heart, Margaret stepped forward, standing tall beside her car. The bikers paused, surprised by her sudden movement. She felt small compared to their imposing figures, but she refused to back down. Her military training kicked in, she had faced enemies before, and this was no different. The leader of the gang smirked at her boldness, but didn't back away. Instead, he leaned closer, challenging her with his gaze. The other bikers watched intently, they were eager for something to happen. Margaret could feel their energy shifting from amusement to hostility. In that moment, time seemed to stretch out endlessly. Margaret's mind raced as she considered her options. Should she confront them directly? Or should she try to defuse the situation? She remembered how important it was to stay calm under pressure. As she stood there, staring down the leader of the Steel Scorpions, an idea sparked in her mind. Instead of showing fear or anger, she decided to show strength in another way, by sharing a part of herself that they could not take away, her story. Margaret took a deep breath and began to speak about her past, the battle she fought and the comrades she lost. She spoke not just about war but about honor and respect. The bikers listened at first with skepticism. They were not used to hearing such words from someone like her. But as she continued, something shifted in the air around them. The laughter faded into silence as they absorbed what she was saying. For a brief moment, it felt like they were no longer just a gang looking for trouble. They were human beings listening to another human being share a piece of herself. Yet just as hope began to bloom within Margaret's chest, one biker broke the spell with a scoff that echoed harshly against her words. He stepped forward aggressively, shattering the fragile connection she had begun to build. Margaret's heart sank as tension surged back into the air like an electric current. The leader's smirk returned as he turned back toward his gang, signaling that it was time for them to make their move. In an instant, everything changed again. The laughter returned, but now it was mocking and cruel. They surrounded her Mustang more tightly now, their intentions clear and dangerous. Margaret's mind raced again. This time it wasn't about words but action. She had faced danger before and knew what needed to be done. With adrenaline pumping through her veins, she prepared herself for whatever came next. The situation escalated quickly as one biker reached for something on his belt, a glint of metal catching Margaret's eye like a warning sign flashing red in her mind. She had only moments to react as chaos threatened to erupt around her. A battle between courage and fear played out within her heart as she braced for what was coming next at that gas station where everything had begun so quietly just moments before. The tension hung thick in the air as both sides prepared for conflict. Margaret stood firm beside her Mustang while the Steel Scorpions closed in around her with intentions that were anything but peaceful. What would happen next? Would courage triumph over chaos? Would this quiet encounter turn into something far more dangerous? Anna, the gas station owner, watched from the corner of her shop, her heart racing. She had seen the Steel Scorpions before, and their arrival always brought trouble. Anna knew Margaret well. They had become friends over the years. Margaret often stopped by for gas, sharing stories of her past and her time in the military. Anna admired Margaret's bravery and strength, but now she felt a sense of dread. As the bikers closed in on Margaret, Anna's instinct kicked in. She could not just stand by and watch. She stepped outside, her voice steady but firm as she called out to Margaret. The two women exchanged a quick glance, a silent understanding passing between them. Anna knew Margaret was not one to back down easily. Margaret felt a surge of relief at Anna's presence. She appreciated the support, knowing that Anna understood the situation. They had talked about the dangers of the bikers before, and now they were facing it together. The bond they shared gave Margaret strength as she stood beside her Mustang. Anna approached cautiously, her eyes darting between Margaret and the gang. She could see the tension building, and she knew words would be important now more than ever. She reminded herself that Margaret was a hero, someone who had faced real danger before. Anna believed in her friend's ability to handle this situation. As they stood together, Anna spoke softly to Margaret, encouraging her to stay calm. They both knew that showing fear would only invite more trouble from the gang. Margaret nodded, feeling reassured by Anna's presence. Together, they formed a united front against the looming threat. The bikers noticed Anna's approach and shifted their attention toward her. Their laughter faded slightly as they sized up the two women standing defiantly beside the Mustang. The leader of the gang smirked again, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged by women. Anna took a deep breath and reminded herself of all those times Margaret had shared her stories, the battles fought not just on foreign soil, but also in everyday life. She thought about how important it was for both of them to stand strong now. Margaret felt a wave of gratitude wash over her as she realized how much Anna believed in her. They had shared laughter and tears over cups of coffee in that very gas station, and now they faced this moment together with courage. The bikers shifted closer, their intentions clear as they loomed over the two women. The air crackled with tension again, but this time it felt different. There was a sense of solidarity between Margaret and Anna that could not be easily broken. Margaret took another step forward, feeling emboldened by Anna's presence. She remembered her training, the lessons learned in tough times, and she knew she had to stand tall for both of them. The steel scorpions might have come looking for trouble, but she would not allow them to intimidate her or her friend. Anna stood beside Margaret, ready to support her no matter what happened next. Together they formed a barrier against the chaos threatening to erupt around them. The bikers hesitated for just a moment as they sensed something shifting in the air, a change that made them reconsider their approach. With courage growing within them both, Margaret and Anna prepared for whatever might come next. They were ready to face this challenge head-on, united against the threat that loomed large before them at that gas station where friendship and bravery intertwined in an extraordinary moment. The steel scorpions exchanged glances among themselves, their bravado wavering slightly as they assessed the situation anew. It was clear that these two women were not backing down easily, they were ready to fight for their ground. As tension hung thick in the air once more, it became evident that this encounter would not end quietly or without consequence. The bikers were still dangerous, but so were Margaret and Anna when pushed into a corner. With hearts racing and determination burning bright within them, both women stood firm against the storm brewing around them, ready to defend what mattered most as chaos threatened to take hold at any moment. What would happen next? Would courage truly triumph over chaos? Would friendship prove stronger than fear? The bikers moved closer, their presence overwhelming as they attempted to intimidate Margaret and Anna. The leader stepped forward, a sneer on his face, trying to assert dominance. He gestured toward the Mustang, making it clear that they saw it as a prize to be claimed. The other bikers laughed, their voices loud and mocking, but Margaret stood her ground. With her heart pounding, she recalled the many situations she had faced in combat. She had learned that sometimes the best way to deal with bullies was to show them that you would not be afraid. Drawing on her military experience, she took a deep breath and spoke with conviction. She warned them about their arrogance, reminding them that underestimating someone could lead to serious consequences. The bikers paused, momentarily taken aback by her words. They were not used to being challenged like this, especially by a woman who appeared small in stature but radiated strength. Margaret's voice was steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. She reminded them that she had faced real danger before and had come out stronger on the other side. Anna stood beside her, feeling inspired by Margaret's courage. She could see the shift in the bikers' demeanor. They were no longer laughing as loudly. Instead, they exchanged glances filled with uncertainty. The leader's smirk faltered for just a moment as he processed Margaret's warning. Margaret continued to speak, her words firm and unwavering. She told them that they were not invincible and that their intimidation tactics would not work on her. Her eyes locked onto the leader's gaze, challenging him to make a move if he dared. The air crackled with tension as both sides assessed each other. The bikers shifted uneasily, their bravado beginning to wane. They were still dangerous, but Margaret's unexpected resistance had thrown them off balance. Anna could see the hesitation in their eyes. Perhaps they had not expected this kind of fight from an older woman. Margaret felt a surge of empowerment as she stood there, fueled by her past experiences and the bond of friendship with Anna. She knew that they were stronger together and that fear could be transformed into strength when faced with adversity. The leader of the gang tried to regain control of the situation, barking orders at his friends to surround Margaret and Anna more closely. But now there was a flicker of doubt among the bikers. They were no longer certain of their advantage. Margaret sensed this shift and pressed on, reminding them that true strength lay not in numbers, but in character. She spoke about respect, how it was earned through actions rather than intimidation. Her voice carried weight as she shared snippets of her military past, stories of bravery and sacrifice that resonated even with those who seemed hardened by life. The bikers listened now, their laughter replaced by silence as they absorbed what she was saying. For a moment, it felt like they were no longer just a gang looking for trouble. They were human beings confronted with something real, a woman who had fought for her country and was now fighting for herself and her friend. But just as hope began to rise within Margaret's chest, one of the younger bikers scoffed loudly, breaking the spell again. He stepped forward defiantly, trying to re-establish their dominance with bravado that rang hollow in the charged atmosphere. Margaret felt her heart race again as she braced herself for what might come next. The tension escalated once more. It was clear that while some bikers were reconsidering their approach, others were still eager for confrontation. Anna stood firm beside Margaret, ready to support her friend no matter what happened next. They both understood that this moment could change everything. Their courage could either inspire or provoke further aggression from the gang. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, Margaret prepared herself for whatever might unfold next at the gas station where two brave hearts stood against an intimidating force determined to disrupt their peace. The bikers seemed divided now, some looked uncertain while others remained eager for chaos. The leader glanced back at his gang, weighing his options as he tried to decide how to respond to this unexpected challenge. In that charged moment filled with uncertainty and tension, it became clear that this encounter would be remembered, not just by Margaret and Anna, but also by the steel scorpions who had underestimated them both. Would courage truly triumph over chaos? Would friendship prove stronger than fear? The tension reached a boiling point as the bikers exchanged glances, their uncertainty morphing into a dangerous energy. The leader finally made his decision, stepping forward with a menacing grin. He shouted something to rally his gang, and the atmosphere shifted again, thickening with anticipation. Margaret felt her heart race as she prepared for the worst. She had trained for moments like this, where every second counted, and she knew she had to act. With Anna beside her, she took a deep breath, focusing on the situation at hand. She could not let fear take hold, she had to protect herself and her friend. Suddenly, one of the younger bikers lunged at Margaret, thinking he could catch her off guard. But Margaret was ready. Drawing on her military training, she sidestepped swiftly and grabbed his arm, using his own momentum against him. In one fluid motion, she twisted his wrist and disarmed him, sending the weapon clattering to the ground. Gasps erupted from the gang as they witnessed this unexpected display of skill. The young biker stumbled back in shock, clutching his wrist in pain. The leader's confident smirk vanished as he realized that Margaret was not just an ordinary woman, she was a warrior. With adrenaline surging through her veins, Margaret stood tall and fierce. She faced the gang with unwavering determination, her eyes locked onto the leaders. The bikers hesitated now, their bravado shaken by what they had just witnessed. They had come looking for trouble, but found themselves confronted by someone who refused to back down. Anna felt a rush of pride for her friend as she watched Margaret take control of the situation. The bond between them strengthened in that moment, they were united against a common threat. Margaret's actions had turned the tide, and now it was clear that the Steel Scorpions were not as invincible as they thought. The leader glanced around at his gang, sensing their fear. He tried to regain control by shouting orders, but his voice lacked the confidence it once had. The bikers were visibly shaken, they had underestimated Margaret's resolve and skill. Margaret seized the moment to assert herself further. She warned them that they had crossed a line and that their intimidation would not be tolerated. Her voice rang out strong and clear, echoing through the gas station as she made it known that they were no longer in charge. The bikers began to retreat slowly, their bravado crumbling under the weight of Margaret's strength. They backed away from her Mustang, glancing nervously at one another. It was clear they were no longer interested in a fight, they wanted to escape this unexpected confrontation with their pride intact. As they retreated, the leader shot one last glare at Margaret and Anna, vowing revenge with a low growl that sent chills down Anna's spine. He could not accept defeat easily, he would remember this day and come back for what he felt was rightfully his. But for now, the bikers turned their backs and mounted their motorcycles one by one. The rumble of engines filled the air again, but this time it felt different, less menacing and more like a retreating storm. Margaret watched them leave with a mixture of relief and resolve. She had faced them head-on and emerged victorious alongside Anna. The gas station stood quiet once more as the last of the bikers disappeared down the road. In that moment of triumph, both women shared a glance filled with unspoken understanding, a bond forged in courage and resilience. They had faced chaos together and emerged stronger on the other side. But even as they celebrated this small victory, Margaret knew that danger still lurked in the shadows. The Steel Scorpions would not forget what happened today, they would return seeking revenge. As silence settled over the gas station once more, both women understood that this encounter was just one chapter in a larger story, one where courage would continue to clash with chaos in ways yet unseen. What would happen next? Would they be ready for whatever came after? As the last of the bikers roared away, Margaret and Anna stood together, the tension slowly dissipating. But just as they began to feel a sense of relief, a familiar voice cut through the air. It was Jake, one of the steel scorpions who had lingered behind, his motorcycle parked a short distance away. He approached with a slow, deliberate stride, his expression dark and menacing. Margaret's heart sank as she recognized him. He was known for his temper and his loyalty to the gang. Jake had always been the type to hold grudges, and today was no exception. He stopped a few feet away from them, his gaze fixed on Margaret with a mix of anger and disdain. "You think this is over?" he sneered, his voice low and threatening. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that Jake was not finished with them yet. He continued, his tone dripping with menace as he warned her about the reach of the steel scorpions. He spoke about how they had connections everywhere and how they could make life very difficult for someone who crossed them. Each word was like a dagger aimed at her heart, trying to instill fear. Margaret stood her ground, refusing to let Jake's threats shake her resolve. She knew that intimidation was part of their game, but she had faced worse in her life. She had fought for her country and stood up against real enemies. She would not cower now. Anna felt a surge of anger at Jake's words, but also fear for what might come next. She stepped closer to Margaret, ready to support her friend in whatever way she could. Together they formed a united front against this lingering threat. Jake took another step forward, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in closer. He made it clear that they would not forget this day and that there would be consequences for Margaret's defiance. His words were sharp and full of venom, trying to instill doubt in their hearts. But Margaret remained steadfast. She refused to let fear take hold. She understood that Jake was trying to provoke a reaction, hoping to see her falter. Instead, she held her head high and met his gaze with unwavering determination. As Jake turned to leave, he shot one last look over his shoulder, reminding them that the steel scorpions were always watching. His parting words echoed ominously in the air as he revved his motorcycle and sped off into the distance. Once he was gone, silence enveloped the gas station once more. Margaret took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Jake's threat settle heavily on her shoulders. She knew that this encounter was far from over, it had only just begun. Anna turned to Margaret, concern etched on her face. They both understood that they needed to prepare for whatever might come next. The steel scorpions were not just a gang, they were dangerous and relentless. Margaret felt a mix of emotion swirling within her, fear for what lay ahead but also a fierce determination to protect herself and Anna. They had faced chaos together once, they could do it again. As they stood side by side at that gas station where courage had clashed with intimidation, both women knew they needed to be ready for anything. The threat from Jake lingered like a shadow over them, but they would not let it define their lives. What would happen next? Would they be able to stand strong against the looming danger? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the gas station, Margaret stood silently, deep in thought. The encounter with the steel scorpions replayed in her mind, each moment vivid and raw. She felt a mix of pride for standing her ground and concern for what lay ahead. This was not just a battle for herself, it was a fight for the safety of her community. Margaret glanced at Anna, who was busy tidying up the gas station, trying to restore some sense of normalcy after the chaos. They had faced danger together, but Margaret knew this was only the beginning. The threat from Jake and his gang loomed large over Sunset Valley, and she could feel the tension in the air like a storm waiting to break. In that moment of reflection, Margaret realized that this encounter had exposed a deeper issue. The Steel Scorpions were not just a group of troublemakers, they represented something more sinister, a growing wave of violence and intimidation that could spread through their quiet town if left unchecked. She thought about how many others might be affected by their actions and how many people would be too afraid to stand up against them. Margaret's heart swelled with determination. She could not let fear dictate her life or the lives of those around her. As a war hero, she had fought for freedom and justice, and now she felt called to do so again, this time in her own community. She knew that if she wanted to protect Sunset Valley, she would need to rally others who felt the same way. Anna approached Margaret, sensing her friend's turmoil. They exchanged a knowing look. Anna understood that this was more than just a personal struggle. They both felt the weight of responsibility resting on their shoulders. Together, they could make a difference. Margaret took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill her lungs. She resolved to take action. They would need to inform their neighbors about the threat posed by the Steel Scorpions. It was time to unite the community against intimidation and fear. As they finished closing up for the night, Margaret shared her thoughts with Anna. They discussed ways to reach out to others, perhaps organizing a meeting at the local community center where people could come together to discuss their concerns. They needed to create a support network where everyone felt safe sharing their experiences and fears. The two women made plans for the coming days, determined to spread awareness and encourage others to stand up against bullying and violence. They knew it wouldn't be easy, there would be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. As Margaret locked up the gas station for the night, she looked out at Sunset Valley under the fading light. It was still beautiful and peaceful, but now she understood that peace required vigilance and courage. The battle against fear was just beginning. With renewed purpose in her heart, Margaret stepped away from the gas station, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. She knew that together with Anna and their community, they could turn this moment into something powerful, a movement against intimidation that would echo through Sunset Valley. What would happen next? Would they be able to gather enough support? Only time would tell as Margaret prepared for the journey ahead in this extraordinary fight for justice and safety in their beloved town where courage would clash with chaos once more. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the gas station early, her mind racing with thoughts of the previous day's encounter. She was determined to gather as much information as possible about the Steel Scorpions. Anna was already there, brewing coffee and preparing for a long day ahead. They both knew they needed to be ready for whatever might come next. Tom, a local mechanic and a trusted friend, arrived shortly after. He had always been supportive of Margaret and Anna, and they welcomed him into their plan. Together, they decided to review the security footage from the gas station. It was time to uncover any patterns in the bikers' behavior that could help them understand what they were up against. They gathered around the small monitor in the back office, the screen flickering to life as Margaret clicked through the recordings. The footage showed the gas station bustling with customers during the day, but it also revealed moments when the Steel Scorpions had arrived. Margaret's heart raced as she watched the bikers pull in, their motorcycles roaring like thunder. As they reviewed the footage, they noted how often the bikers visited and at what times. They observed their interactions with each other and with customers. Margaret pointed out how they seemed to have a routine, arriving in groups, lingering longer than necessary, and always keeping an eye on their surroundings. Anna leaned in closer, her brow furrowed in concentration. She began to jot down notes about specific patterns she noticed. Tom chimed in with his observations, suggesting that they might be scouting for weaknesses in the community. The more they watched, the clearer it became that this was not just random behavior, there was a method to their madness. Margaret felt a sense of urgency growing within her. This was not merely about protecting herself and Anna, it was about safeguarding everyone in Sunset Valley. As they continued to analyze the footage, they spotted something alarming. A few bikers were seen taking pictures of local businesses and gathering information on people coming and going. The realization hit them hard. These bikers were not just troublemakers looking for a fight, they were planning something bigger. The three of them exchanged worried glances as they understood the implications of what they had uncovered. With each passing moment, Margaret's resolve strengthened. They needed to act quickly before it was too late. She suggested that they compile their findings into a report that could be shared with others in the community. They needed to raise awareness about what was happening and encourage people to be vigilant. As they finished reviewing the footage, Margaret felt a mix of fear and determination wash over her. The steel scorpions were not just a threat, they were a looming danger that could disrupt the peace of Sunset Valley if left unchecked. Tom volunteered to help spread the word among his customers at the garage, while Anna offered to organize a meeting at the community center where everyone could come together to discuss their concerns. Margaret felt grateful for their support. Together they were building a foundation for resistance against intimidation. With a plan forming in their minds, they left the office feeling empowered. They knew that knowledge was power, and now they had valuable information that could help protect their town. As Margaret stepped outside into the bright morning light, she felt renewed hope. This was just the beginning of their fight against chaos, but she believed that with courage and unity, they could unravel the connections that bound Sunset Valley together against any threat. What would happen next? Would their efforts be enough to rally the community? As Margaret, Anna, and Tom gathered their thoughts, a young attendant named Lily entered the gas station. She had just started working there a few weeks ago and was eager to help. Lily was bright and observant, with a keen eye for detail that had already impressed Margaret. Seeing the serious expressions on their faces, Lily approached them with curiosity. She sensed that something important was happening and wanted to be part of it. Margaret welcomed her in, knowing that every perspective could be valuable in their fight against the steel scorpions. Lily began to share her observations about the bikers' previous visits. She recalled how they often came in pairs or small groups, always acting tough, but occasionally showing signs of nervousness when they were around other customers. She mentioned how they seemed to watch everyone closely, as if they were gathering information about the people in the area. As she spoke, tension filled the room. Margaret and Anna exchanged glances, realizing that Lily's insights could provide crucial context to their findings. They asked her to elaborate on what she had seen during those visits. Lily described how the bikers would sometimes linger near the back of the gas station, whispering among themselves while casting glances toward the parking lot. She noted that they often left quickly after refueling, as if they were in a hurry to get away. This behavior struck her as odd, especially since most customers took their time. The conversation shifted as they began discussing possible connections between the bikers and organized crime. Tom shared his concerns about how gangs often operated in patterns, using intimidation to control neighborhoods and businesses. Margaret felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was more serious than she had initially thought. They brainstormed about how the steel scorpions might be linked to larger criminal activities beyond mere intimidation. The idea that they could be part of something more sinister sent shivers down their spines. Lily mentioned hearing rumors from some of her friends about illegal activities happening nearby, drug deals and thefts that seemed connected to biker gangs. As they pieced together their observations, it became clear that the bikers were not just a local nuisance, they were part of a larger web of danger threatening Sunset Valley. The realization deepened their resolve to take action before it was too late. Margaret felt a surge of determination rise within her as she listened to Lily's insights. They needed to gather more information and connect with others who might have seen similar patterns. It was time to reach out to the community and warn them about the potential threat. With tension still hanging in the air, they decided that their next step would be to hold a community meeting at the local center. They would invite everyone, neighbors, business owners, and anyone who had experienced trouble with the steel scorpions or had witnessed suspicious activity. They were no longer just defending themselves, they were standing up for everyone in Sunset Valley. The fight against chaos was becoming clearer, and with each piece of information shared, they grew stronger together. What would happen next? Would their efforts be enough to unite the community against this growing threat? As the day progressed, Margaret sat down with Anna, Tom, and Lily to discuss their findings and the upcoming community meeting. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of determination and anxiety. Margaret began to connect the dots, realizing that the steel scorpions were likely part of a larger operation using the gas station as a front for something more sinister. She recalled Lily's observations about the bikers' behavior, how they lingered, watched others closely, and seemed to be gathering information. It all pointed to a network of activity that extended beyond mere intimidation. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. They could be using the gas station for distribution of illegal goods or services, and this could put everyone in Sunset Valley at risk. Margaret shared her thoughts with the group, explaining how the bikers might be using their presence to distract from their real activities. The gas station was a busy place, and if they were indeed involved in something illegal, it would be easy for them to blend in among unsuspecting customers. Tom nodded in agreement, his expression serious. He suggested that they enhance security measures at the gas station immediately. They needed to protect themselves and their customers while also gathering more evidence about what was happening. Anna chimed in, proposing that they install additional cameras and improve lighting around the property to deter any suspicious activity. Lily offered to help by keeping an eye out during her shifts, ready to report anything unusual. Together, they brainstormed ways to make the gas station a less appealing target for the bikers. They discussed posting signs warning against loitering and encouraging customers to report any strange behavior. Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose as they mapped out their plan. They would not only protect their own interests, but also send a message that Sunset Valley would not tolerate criminal activity. The community needed to come together now more than ever. As they finalized their plans for enhanced security, Margaret reminded everyone that vigilance was key. They had to stay alert and aware of their surroundings, ready to act if they noticed anything suspicious. The fight against chaos required constant attention and effort. With their strategy in place, Margaret felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. They were no longer just reacting to threats, they were taking proactive steps to safeguard their community. She knew that as long as they stood together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As evening approached, Margaret prepared for the community meeting with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She hoped that by sharing their findings and plans for increased security, they could rally support from others who cared about Sunset Valley's safety. What would happen next? Would the community respond positively to their efforts? As night fell over Sunset Valley, the community center buzzed with anticipation. Margaret stood at the front of the room, surrounded by concerned neighbors and friends. She felt a mix of hope and anxiety as she prepared to share their findings about the steel scorpions and the potential threat they posed to the town. Just as she began to speak, a loud roar of motorcycles echoed outside. The sound sent a wave of tension through the crowd. Margaret's heart sank as she recognized the unmistakable growl of the steel scorpions returning, but this time it was different. There were more bikes, more members, and they were clearly ready for confrontation. The door swung open, and the bikers stormed in, led by Jake, who wore a menacing grin. The atmosphere shifted instantly from hopeful to hostile. Margaret felt her stomach tighten as she faced them again, knowing this time would be different. The bikers were not just here to intimidate, they were ready for a fight. Jake stepped forward, his presence dominating the room. He looked around at the gathered crowd with disdain, clearly enjoying the power he wielded. The other bikers flanked him, their expressions aggressive and threatening. Margaret could see that they had come prepared to assert their control over Sunset Valley. The tension in the room escalated as Jake began to taunt Margaret and her supporters. He made it clear that they were not afraid of her or her little meeting. His voice dripped with sarcasm as he dismissed their concerns about safety and security. But Margaret stood her ground, feeling a surge of courage rise within her. She had come too far to back down now. She took a deep breath and addressed Jake directly, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Margaret revealed that she knew about their connections to law enforcement, how some members of the gang had ties to corrupt officials who turned a blind eye to their activities. She explained that they were not just a group of bikers, they were part of something much larger that threatened the very fabric of their community. The room fell silent as everyone processed her words. The bikers exchanged nervous glances, clearly taken aback by Margaret's knowledge. Jake's bravado faltered for a moment as he realized that Margaret was not just an old woman, she was a formidable opponent who had done her homework. Margaret continued, emphasizing that they would not be silenced or intimidated any longer. She called on the community to stand together against this threat, reminding them that they had the power to protect their town if they united in purpose. The bikers shifted uneasily, sensing that this was not going as planned. They had expected fear and submission, but instead found a woman who refused to back down. The standoff grew more intense as both sides prepared for what might come next. Jake's expression hardened as he tried to regain control of the situation. He attempted to rally his gang with empty threats and bravado, but it was clear that doubt had crept into his mind. The bikers were no longer just bullies, they were facing a community ready to fight back. Margaret felt a wave of strength wash over her as she looked at her neighbors, people who had come together to support one another in this moment of crisis. She knew that they could turn this confrontation into a turning point for Sunset Valley. As tensions reached their peak, it became evident that this encounter would determine the future of their town. Would fear prevail, or would courage win out? Jake's bravado began to falter as he faced Margaret and the united community behind her. He tried to maintain an air of confidence, attempting to bluff his way through the confrontation. His voice boomed as he threatened consequences for anyone who dared to challenge the steel scorpions. But beneath his tough exterior, it was clear that uncertainty was creeping in. As he spoke, Jake's words became more frantic. He claimed that they had connections and resources that would make it impossible for anyone in Sunset Valley to stand against them. But in his attempts to intimidate, he inadvertently revealed more than he intended about their operations. He mentioned their dealings with certain individuals who were in the know, hinting at a network of corruption that extended beyond the bikers themselves. Margaret listened intently, her heart racing as she grasped the implications of his words. Each detail he let slip painted a clearer picture of the threat they were facing. It was not just about the steel scorpions, it was about a larger operation that could involve organized crime and corrupt officials working together. The crowd began to murmur among themselves as they processed Jake's revelations. They were no longer just facing a gang of bullies, they were confronting a well-connected organization that had infiltrated their town. The realization brought a mix of fear and determination to the forefront. Margaret seized the moment, stepping forward to address both Jake and her neighbors. She pointed out how his bluster had exposed the very weaknesses they needed to exploit. The community could no longer afford to be passive, they had to act decisively against this threat. Jake's face twisted with anger as he realized he had given away too much information. He tried to regain control, barking orders at his gang, but his voice lacked the confidence it once had. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that their leader was losing grip on the situation. Margaret pressed on, urging her neighbors to understand that they now had an opportunity. They could gather evidence of Jake's admissions and use it to rally more support from others in Sunset Valley who might have felt powerless until now. This was their chance to turn the tide against intimidation. As tension hung thick in the air, Jake's bravado crumbled further. He began to realize that this confrontation was not going in his favor. The community stood united, emboldened by Margaret's words and strengthened by their shared resolve. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, Jake attempted one final threat, but it rang hollow in the charged atmosphere. The bikers behind him shifted uneasily, clearly unsure of their next move. They were no longer just a gang, they were now facing a community ready to expose their secrets. Margaret felt a surge of empowerment wash over her as she looked at her neighbors, people who had come together in this moment of crisis. They were no longer afraid, they were ready to fight back against chaos and intimidation. As Jake's facade crumbled, Margaret knew this was a pivotal moment for Sunset Valley. What would happen next? Would they be able to leverage this newfound knowledge against the steel scorpions? As the confrontation reached its peak, Margaret felt the weight of the moment settle around her. The bikers, led by Jake, were visibly shaken. The community stood strong behind her, their faces a mix of determination and defiance. It was clear that they would not back down. Margaret knew this was her chance to make a lasting impression. As the tension hung in the air, she stepped forward once more, locking eyes with Jake. She wanted him to understand that they had crossed a line, and now he would face the consequences of underestimating her. With a steady voice, she warned him not to take her lightly. She reminded him of her military background and the skills she possessed. She had fought for her country and had faced real danger before. This was not just a game for her, it was a fight for the safety of her community. Jake's bravado began to fade as he processed her words. He had thought of Margaret as just an older woman, someone easy to intimidate. But now he realized that she was a force to be reckoned with. The biker shifted uncomfortably, sensing the shift in power dynamics. Margaret continued, emphasizing that they would not allow fear to dictate their lives any longer. She urged Jake and his gang to reconsider their actions and think about the impact they were having on Sunset Valley. They could either choose to back down or face the united front of a community ready to stand up for itself. As she spoke, Margaret felt a surge of confidence wash over her. She was no longer just defending herself, she was leading a movement against intimidation and chaos. The crowd behind her erupted in supportive murmurs, reinforcing her message. Jake's expression hardened as he realized he had underestimated Margaret and the strength of the community standing with her. He tried to regain his composure but could feel the tide turning against him. The bikers were no longer convinced by his bravado, they were beginning to see the reality of their situation. With one last glare at Margaret, Jake turned on his heel and motioned for his gang to follow him out. As they left, Margaret felt a sense of victory swell within her. They had faced down a threat together and emerged stronger. But as Jake exited, he shot one final warning back at Margaret, a reminder that this fight was far from over. He made it clear that they would not forget this encounter and that retaliation could be expected. Margaret stood tall as she watched them leave, feeling both empowered and aware of the challenges still ahead. She knew this was just one battle in an ongoing war against intimidation and chaos in Sunset Valley. As the bikers disappeared into the night, Margaret turned back to her neighbors, who were buzzing with energy from the confrontation. They had come together to protect their town, and now they needed to plan their next steps carefully. What would happen next? Would they be able to maintain their unity in the face of future threats? She had been monitoring the area for weeks, gathering intelligence on the steel scorpions and their activities. Clara was determined to piece together the puzzle that had eluded law enforcement for too long. With her notebook open on her lap, she scribbled notes about the bikers' movements and interactions. She had observed their patterns, noting how they frequented the gas station and interacted with local businesses. Clara understood that this was not just a gang, they were part of a larger operation that involved illegal activities and connections that reached far beyond Sunset Valley. Her instincts told her that something significant was happening at the gas station. The confrontation between Margaret and the bikers had caught her attention, and she had witnessed the aftermath from afar. Clara had seen Margaret standing tall against Jake and his gang, and she admired the courage of the community coming together to support her. As Clara continued to observe, she noticed familiar faces among the bikers, individuals she had seen in previous surveillance footage linked to various criminal activities. It was clear that the Steel Scorpions were not just a local nuisance, they were part of a network that extended into organized crime. Clara's mind raced as she connected the dots. She recalled snippets of information from her previous investigations, rumors of drug trafficking, extortion, and corruption involving local officials. The pieces were falling into place, and she knew she needed to act quickly before things escalated further. She made a note to reach out to her contacts within law enforcement to share her findings. Clara understood that this was not just about taking down a gang, it was about protecting innocent lives in Sunset Valley. The community deserved to feel safe in their own town, free from intimidation and fear. As she continued to watch, Clara saw Margaret exit the gas station, flanked by Anna and Tom. She knew that while they had won this battle, the war was far from over. Clara decided it was time to approach them. She could provide valuable information and support in their fight against the Steel Scorpions. But first, she needed to be cautious. Trust was hard-earned in a small town where everyone knew each other. With determination in her heart, Clara prepared to introduce herself to Margaret and her friends. She hoped they would understand that she was there to help them navigate the shadows of betrayal that loomed over Sunset Valley. What would happen next? Would Clara's presence strengthen their resolve or create new challenges? As Clara approached Margaret and her friends, memories flooded her mind, bringing with them a mix of determination and resolve. Flashbacks of her past encounters with organized crime played out like a film, each scene etched in her memory. She recalled the faces of criminals she had pursued, the danger she had faced, and the moments when she felt the weight of justice resting heavily on her shoulders. Clara remembered one particular case that had haunted her, a small town much like Sunset Valley, where a gang had terrorized the community for years. She had worked tirelessly to gather evidence, to build a case that would bring them down. But in the end, it had taken more than just her efforts. It required the entire town to unite against the threat. That experience had shaped her understanding of the power of community and the importance of trust. Now, as she stood before Margaret and her friends, Clara felt that same urgency rising within her. She knew that the Steel Scorpions were not just a local gang, they were part of a larger network that needed to be dismantled. The shadows of betrayal loomed over Sunset Valley, and she was determined to shine a light on them. Clara took a deep breath and introduced herself to Margaret. She explained her role as an FBI agent and shared her background in investigating organized crime. Margaret listened intently, sensing Clara's sincerity and commitment to helping their community. The tension from earlier began to dissipate as they realized they were on the same side. Clara emphasized the importance of working together with local law enforcement. She knew that building relationships with officers who understood the dynamics of Sunset Valley would be crucial in their fight against the Steel Scorpions. They needed to gather intelligence, share information, and create a united front against intimidation. Margaret nodded in agreement, feeling a renewed sense of hope. She understood that Clara's experience could provide valuable insights into how to approach this situation strategically. Together, they discussed reaching out to local law enforcement officers who could assist in gathering more information about the bikers' operations. As they formulated their plan, Clara shared details about her past investigations, how she had successfully taken down gangs by leveraging community support and intelligence from local residents. The stories inspired Margaret and her friends, reinforcing their belief that they could make a difference. With Clara's guidance, they decided to organize a meeting with local law enforcement officials to discuss their findings about the Steel Scorpions. They would present their evidence and work collaboratively to develop strategies for addressing the growing threat in Sunset Valley. As they wrapped up their conversation, Clara felt a sense of camaraderie forming among them. This was more than just an investigation, it was a mission to protect their town and restore peace. They were no longer alone in this fight. They had each other and a shared purpose. What would happen next? As the days passed, the atmosphere in Sunset Valley grew tense. Margaret and her allies were acutely aware that the confrontation with the Steel Scorpions had not gone unnoticed. They were preparing for potential retaliation, knowing that Jake and his gang would not take their defeat lightly. Margaret, Anna, Tom, and Clara met regularly to discuss their strategy. They knew they needed to gather more evidence against the bikers while maintaining a sense of normalcy at the gas station. It was crucial to keep the community calm and unaware of the brewing storm. Each day, they worked diligently to document any suspicious activity around the gas station. Clara suggested they set up a system for reporting unusual occurrences, encouraging customers and employees to speak up if they noticed anything out of the ordinary. They placed a suggestion box near the register, hoping it would empower people to share their concerns without fear. Meanwhile, Margaret took charge of ensuring that the gas station operated smoothly. She greeted customers with her usual warmth, engaging them in friendly conversation while subtly observing their behavior. Anna helped by keeping an eye on the parking lot, ready to alert Margaret if she saw any familiar bikers approaching. Tom used his mechanic shop as a vantage point. He kept watch from the garage door, ready to alert Margaret and Anna if he spotted any Steel Scorpions lurking nearby. The trio worked seamlessly together, each playing a vital role in maintaining security while keeping the gas station running. Despite their efforts, tension lingered in the air. Margaret could feel it every time she looked out at the road, half expecting to see a group of motorcycles approaching. The fear of retaliation weighed heavily on her mind, but she refused to let it consume her. Instead, she channeled that energy into action that would protect her community. One afternoon, as they gathered for another meeting in the back office, Clara shared insights from her ongoing investigation. She had been in contact with local law enforcement and had received promising news about their willingness to support their efforts against organized crime in Sunset Valley. Clara explained that officers were eager to work with them but needed more concrete evidence to act decisively against the Steel Scorpions. This motivated Margaret and her allies even more. They knew they had to dig deeper and find the proof necessary to bring down this gang once and for all. As they discussed their next steps, Clara emphasized the importance of remaining vigilant. They needed to be prepared for anything, whether it was an attempt at intimidation or worse. The group agreed that they would continue gathering evidence while also keeping an eye on their surroundings. That night, as Margaret closed up the gas station, she felt a mix of determination and anxiety. She knew they were on the brink of something significant, a battle against chaos that could change everything for Sunset Valley. What would happen next? Would their preparations be enough to deter retaliation from the bikers? The following afternoon, the gas station buzzed with activity. Customers filled the aisles, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. Margaret felt a sense of normalcy as she served customers, but in the back of her mind, she remained alert. The tension from the past few days lingered like a storm cloud overhead. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere shattered as a roar of motorcycles approached. Margaret's heart raced as she recognized the unmistakable sound of the Steel Scorpions. Panic rippled through the crowd as bikers stormed into the gas station, their leather jackets glistening ominously in the sunlight. Margaret quickly assessed the situation. She spotted Anna behind the counter and Lily stocking shelves nearby. Instinct kicked in. She needed to protect them and gather information about what was happening. The bikers were here for a reason, and she had to find out what it was. As chaos erupted, customers scrambled for the exits, fear etched on their faces. The bikers shouted orders, trying to assert their dominance over the scene. Margaret moved swiftly toward Anna and Lily, urging them to stay close. "Stay down. We need to get to safety," Margaret shouted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She guided Anna and Lily behind the counter, where they would be less visible. From her vantage point, Margaret watched as Jake and his gang began to ransack the store. They were looking for something, perhaps evidence that could expose their operations or information about her and her allies. She realized this was more than just intimidation, it was a desperate attempt to regain control. As one of the bikers moved toward the office area where they had stored crucial evidence, Margaret knew she had to act fast. She glanced at Anna and Lily, who were crouched low but clearly terrified. "I need you both to stay here," she whispered urgently. "I'll handle this." Margaret took a deep breath and slipped out from behind the counter, moving stealthily toward the office. Her military training kicked in. She had faced danger before and knew how to navigate chaotic situations. As she approached the office door, she overheard snippets of conversation among the bikers. They were discussing their connections to law enforcement and how they had been tipped off about Margaret's investigation. The realization sent chills down her spine. They were aware of her efforts to expose them. Determined not to let them succeed, Margaret quietly opened the office door just enough to slip inside without being noticed. She quickly scanned the room for anything that could serve as evidence against them, documents, photos, anything that would help build a case. While searching through papers on a desk, Margaret heard footsteps approaching. Her heart raced as she ducked behind a filing cabinet just in time to avoid being seen. The biker entered, looking around suspiciously as he searched for any signs of intruders. Margaret held her breath, knowing that one wrong move could expose her position. She listened intently as he muttered under his breath about needing to find whatever they were looking for before it was too late. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from outside as another biker yelled at customers who were trying to escape. The noise drew attention away from Margaret's hiding spot momentarily, giving her a brief window of opportunity. With adrenaline pumping through her veins, she quickly grabbed a folder filled with documents that detailed their operations, names, locations, everything she needed to take back to Clara and local law enforcement. Just as she turned to exit the office, she bumped into another biker who had entered without warning. He glared at her with surprise and anger in his eyes. In that split second, Margaret knew she had to fight back or risk losing everything. With quick reflexes honed from years of training, she pushed past him and sprinted toward the exit where Anna and Lily were still hiding behind the counter. Chaos continued outside as more bikers shouted orders and customers screamed in fear. Margaret burst through the door just in time to see Jake rounding up his gang members. "We need to get out of here," he shouted angrily, realizing they were losing control over the situation. Margaret rushed back behind the counter where Anna and Lily were waiting anxiously. "I got what we need." "We have to leave now," she urged them. With no time to waste, they made their way toward the back exit of the gas station while chaos reigned outside. As they slipped out into an alleyway behind the building, Margaret felt a mix of relief and urgency wash over her. They needed to regroup with Clara and share what they had learned about the 𝗗𝗜𝗦𝗛𝗥 operations before it was too late. The battle was far from over, it was only just beginning. What would happen next? Would they be able to use this evidence against the bikers? As Margaret, Anna, and Lily slipped into the alley behind the gas station, they could still hear the chaos unfolding inside. The sounds of shouting and revving engines echoed in their ears, but they had no time to dwell on it. They needed to regroup with Clara and share the evidence Margaret had managed to grab. Just as they were about to make their way down the alley, a customer burst through the back door of the gas station, wide-eyed and confused. He was a regular at the station, known for his jovial personality and 𝗵𝗠𝗠𝗏 for making light of any situation. In the midst of the chaos, he looked around and shouted, "Wow! What a wild promotion! I didn't know you guys were doing our biker bash today." Margaret turned to Anna and Lily, momentarily stunned by his misunderstanding. The customer continued to laugh, thinking this was all part of a marketing stunt. He had no idea that real danger was unfolding just a few feet away. "Hey, I'll take 2 gallons of that excitement," he joked, completely oblivious to the tension in the air. "Is there a coupon for this? I hope it comes with free snacks." Margaret couldn't help but chuckle despite the seriousness of their situation. The absurdity of it all provided a brief moment of levity amid the chaos. Anna and Lily exchanged glances, their expression shifting from fear to amusement as they realized how out of touch the customer was with reality. "Sir, this is not a promotion," Margaret called out as she waved him over urgently. "You need to get out of here now." The customer's laughter faded as he finally registered the urgency in her voice. He looked back at the gas station where bikers were still causing a ruckus, and his smile vanished. Realizing that this was no joke, he quickly turned serious. "Oh. What's going on? There's no time to explain. Just go," Margaret urged him. With that, he nodded and sprinted away from the gas station, finally understanding that this was not an event but a dangerous situation. As he ran off into the distance, Margaret felt a mix of relief and frustration. While she appreciated the humor in his mistake, they couldn't afford any distractions right now. Once he was gone, Margaret turned back to Anna and Lily. "We need to move quickly," she said firmly. They resumed their hurried escape down the alleyway, adrenaline pumping through their veins. As they reached the end of the alley, they glanced back at the gas station one last time. The chaos inside continued unabated, but they had each other and their newfound determination to fight back against the 𝗗𝗜𝗦𝗛𝗥. They made their way toward Clara's location, ready to share what they had learned about the bikers' operations. The humorous moment with the customer had provided a brief respite from fear, but now they were focused once more on their mission. What would happen next? Would their teamwork lead them to victory against the bikers? As Margaret, Anna, and Lily reached the end of the alley, they paused for a moment to catch their breath. The sounds of chaos from the gas station began to fade as the bikers, realizing they had not found what they were looking for, revved their engines and sped away. The tension in the air slowly lifted, but Margaret's heart remained heavy with concern. Once they were sure the bikers were gone, they made their way to Clara's location. They needed to regroup and share the evidence Margaret had gathered. But as they walked, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much worse. The Steel Scorpions were not going to back down easily. Their tactics were escalating, and she knew they would retaliate. When they arrived at Clara's location, she greeted them with a look of relief mixed with urgency. "I saw some of the bikers leave," Clara said quickly. "What happened?" Margaret took a deep breath and recounted the events of the afternoon, the chaos at the gas station, how she had managed to gather evidence, and the surreal moment with the customer who thought it was all a promotion. As she spoke, she could see Clara's expression change from concern to determination. Clara listened intently, taking notes on everything Margaret shared. She understood that this incident was more than just an attack. It was a sign that the Steel Scorpions were feeling threatened and would likely escalate their efforts to intimidate and control Sunset Valley. "We need to prepare for what's next," Clara said firmly. "This isn't over. They'll come back, and we need to be ready." Margaret nodded in agreement. She felt a surge of adrenaline at Clara's words. They had faced one confrontation, but now it was time to strategize for future encounters. They needed to fortify their defenses and gather more intelligence about the bikers' operations. The group brainstormed ideas on how to enhance security at the gas station and within the community. They discussed organizing neighborhood watch groups and holding meetings to keep everyone informed about potential threats. It was essential that everyone felt empowered to report suspicious activity without fear. As they planned, Margaret felt a sense of urgency wash over her. She knew that time was of the essence. They had to act quickly before the bikers regrouped and launched another attack. "Let's also reach out to local businesses," Margaret suggested. "If we can unite as a community, we'll be stronger against them." Clara agreed, noting that building alliances with other business owners would create a network of support that could help deter future intimidation attempts. They decided to set up a meeting with local shopkeepers to discuss their experiences and share information about the Steel Scorpions. As they wrapped up their planning session, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle against chaos was far from over, but she knew they had each other and a community ready to stand together against intimidation. What would happen next? Would their preparations be enough to deter retaliation from the bikers? As the days passed, the atmosphere in Sunset Valley shifted. What had once been a quiet town began to feel the tightening grip of the Steel Scorpions. Reports of crime started to rise, and the community was on edge. Margaret, Clara, Anna, and Lily felt the weight of their mission grow heavier as they witnessed the effects of the bikers' activities firsthand. It started with small incidents, vandalism at local businesses, thefts from parked cars, and whispers of intimidation among residents. People who had once felt safe began to look over their shoulders, and the vibrant spirit of Sunset Valley dimmed under the shadow of fear. The community that had come together to support one another now found itself grappling with uncertainty. Margaret and her allies worked tirelessly to gather information about these incidents. They reached out to local shopkeepers, urging them to report any suspicious behavior. Clara coordinated with law enforcement, sharing details about the rising crime rates and emphasizing the need for increased patrols in the area. One evening, as they gathered at the gas station to discuss their findings, they noticed a group of customers lingering outside, their faces drawn with worry. Margaret approached them, sensing their unease. They shared stories of recent thefts and encounters with bikers that left them feeling vulnerable. The stories were alarming. A local bakery had been vandalized after refusing to serve bikers who had demanded free food. A resident's car had been broken into while parked outside a cafe. The fear was palpable. People were beginning to feel that no one was safe. As Margaret listened, she felt a surge of determination. This was not just about her or her friends, it was about protecting their entire community from a growing threat. They needed to act quickly before fear took root and paralyzed Sunset Valley. With Clara's guidance, they decided to hold an emergency meeting at the community center. They would invite everyone, business owners, residents, and anyone who had experienced trouble with the steel scorpions. It was crucial to unite the community against this escalating violence. As they prepared for the meeting, Margaret felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. She knew they had to provide a clear plan for how to combat the bikers' influence and reassure everyone that they could reclaim their town from intimidation. The day of the meeting arrived, and as people filled the community center, Margaret stood at the front with Clara by her side. The room buzzed with apprehension as residents exchanged worried glances. Margaret took a deep breath and began to speak. She shared stories of resilience from their recent encounters with the bikers and emphasized that they were not alone in this fight. Together, they could stand up against chaos and intimidation. She urged everyone to share their experiences and report any suspicious activity without fear. As she spoke, Margaret could see determination beginning to spark in the eyes of her neighbors. They were ready to fight back against the steel scorpions and reclaim their sense of safety. But even as hope began to rise in the room, Margaret knew that danger still lurked around every corner. The web was tightening around Sunset Valley, and they needed to be vigilant if they were going to unravel it before it ensnared them all. What would happen next? Would their efforts be enough to unite the community against the bikers? As the meeting continued, the atmosphere shifted from one of hope to one of unease. While many townsfolk felt inspired by Margaret's words, whispers began to circulate about their local law enforcement. Some residents expressed doubts about whether the police could truly protect them from the steel scorpions, given the rising crime rates and the bikers' apparent boldness. Margaret listened intently as conversations unfolded around her. A group of older residents shared stories about past encounters with law enforcement that left them feeling unsupported. They spoke of times when they reported incidents only to be met with indifference or, worse, a sense that their concerns were falling on deaf ears. One woman recounted a time when her store was vandalized, and when she called the police, they took hours to respond. By the time they arrived, the damage was done, and no one was held accountable. The frustration in her voice echoed throughout the room, resonating with others who had similar experiences. As Margaret absorbed their fears, flashbacks flickered through her mind, memories of Sunset Valley that revealed a darker side. She recalled stories she had heard over the years about corruption running deep within the town's leadership. There were whispers of officers turning a blind eye to certain activities in exchange for favors or money. It was a web of deceit that had woven itself into the fabric of their community. Margaret remembered a time when she had been a young soldier returning home. She had witnessed firsthand how corruption could undermine trust and safety in a community. She thought about how it had taken years for those affected by such corruption to find their voices again. The realization hit her hard: if they were going to fight back against the steel scorpions, they would also need to confront these underlying issues within their own law enforcement. They needed allies who were genuinely committed to protecting Sunset Valley, not those who might be compromised by outside influences. As discussions continued around her, Margaret decided it was time to address these fears head-on. She stood up once more and called for attention. She acknowledged the concerns about local law enforcement and urged everyone to share their experiences openly. It was important for them to understand that they were not alone in this fight. Margaret proposed that they form a committee dedicated to investigating these allegations of corruption within their police force. This would not only help them hold law enforcement accountable, but also ensure that they had allies who truly cared about their safety. The room buzzed with mixed reactions. Some were supportive of her idea, while others remained skeptical. But Margaret could see a flicker of determination in many eyes. They were beginning to understand that change was possible if they worked together. As conversations continued, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were not just fighting against the Steel Scorpions, they were also confronting a system that had failed them for too long. The web that had tightened around Sunset Valley was beginning to unravel as they took steps toward reclaiming their community. What would happen next? Would their efforts lead to meaningful change in both their fight against the bikers and within local law enforcement? In the days that followed, Clara took it upon herself to gather intel from local businesses. She visited shops, cafes, and restaurants, speaking with owners and employees about their experiences with the Steel Scorpions. Many were hesitant to share their stories, fearing retaliation from the gang. Clara understood their concerns but assured them that they were working together to reclaim their town. As she formed alliances with wary residents, Clara emphasized the importance of unity in the face of danger. She encouraged business owners to report any suspicious activity and to support one another in this fight. Slowly but surely, trust began to build, and more people started to come forward with their experiences. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her work at the gas station, determined to keep things running smoothly while also preparing for the challenges ahead. However, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over her. The Steel Scorpions were still out there, and she knew they would not take kindly to her efforts to expose them. One afternoon, while Margaret was busy serving customers, she received a call from Anna. Her voice trembled with urgency as she relayed unsettling news. Someone had left a threatening message on the gas station's door, a warning for Margaret to back off or face consequences. Margaret's heart sank as she listened. The threats were not just directed at her, they were aimed at her allies as well. The bikers were escalating their tactics, trying to instill fear in those who dared to stand against them. It was a clear message that they would not tolerate any challenges to their authority. Determined not to let fear take hold, Margaret gathered Anna and Lily in the back office to discuss the situation. They needed a plan to protect themselves and each other while continuing their mission against the Steel Scorpions. As they brainstormed ideas, tension filled the room. They knew that the bikers would likely retaliate if they felt threatened or cornered. Margaret emphasized the importance of staying vigilant and keeping communication open among themselves and their allies. Clara joined them shortly after, having heard about the threats against Margaret and her team. She immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and suggested they increase security measures at the gas station. They could install better lighting around the property and set up a system for alerting each other if anything suspicious occurred. Margaret agreed but felt a sense of urgency growing within her. They had to act quickly before fear paralyzed them, or worse, before something happened that could put them all in danger. As they wrapped up their meeting, Margaret made it clear that they would not be intimidated by threats. They had come too far and built too many alliances to back down now. The community was beginning to unite against the 𝗗𝗜𝗦𝗛𝗥, and they needed to keep that momentum going. That night, as Margaret locked up the gas station, she felt a mix of determination and anxiety wash over her. The web was tightening around Sunset Valley, but she was ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. She knew that courage would clash with intimidation in ways yet unseen, and she was prepared for this extraordinary journey, a journey that could change everything for Sunset Valley forever. What would happen next? Would their efforts be enough to deter further threats from the bikers? As the days turned into a tense week, Margaret and Clara worked diligently to gather more evidence against the 𝗗𝗜𝗦𝗛𝗥. They had managed to build a network of support within the community, but the looming threat of retaliation from the bikers hung over them like a dark cloud. One evening, Clara received a tip-off that some local law enforcement officers were involved with the 𝗗𝗜𝗦𝗛𝗥. The information came from a source who had witnessed suspicious exchanges between certain officers and bikers. Clara knew they needed to investigate this further, but she also understood the risks involved. If they were right, they were stepping into dangerous territory. Clara called an urgent meeting with Margaret and their closest allies. As they gathered in the back office of the gas station, Clara laid out what she had learned. The room fell silent as they absorbed the weight of her words. The idea that some officers, those who were supposed to protect them, might actually be complicit with the gang was shocking. Margaret felt a mix of anger and betrayal swell within her. She had always believed in the integrity of law enforcement, but now it seemed that trust was being shattered. "We need to confront them," she said firmly, her resolve hardening. "If they are working with the bikers, we can't let them get away with it." Clara nodded, knowing that this was a pivotal moment. They decided to set up a meeting with a few trusted officers who had shown support for their cause in the past. They hoped these officers would be willing to investigate further and expose any corruption within their ranks. The following day, they arranged to meet at a secluded location away from prying eyes. As they waited for the officers to arrive, tension filled the air. Margaret felt her heart race. She knew that this confrontation could change everything. When the officers arrived, Clara and Margaret presented their findings, detailing the connections between certain law enforcement members and the 𝗗𝗜𝗦𝗛𝗥. The officers listened intently, but as Clara spoke, Margaret noticed subtle shifts in their expressions, unease, disbelief, and even defensiveness. Just as Clara was about to reveal more evidence, one of the officers abruptly interrupted her. He claimed that they were overstepping their bounds and that such accusations could have serious consequences. The tension in the air thickened as Margaret felt her frustration boiling over. "Are you really going to protect them?" Margaret challenged, her voice steady but firm. "People are getting hurt because of this corruption. We need your help." The atmosphere shifted dramatically as another officer spoke up, revealing that he had been investigating similar claims for months but had faced resistance from within his own department. Secrets began to unravel as he shared his own experiences of feeling powerless against those who should have been allies. As more truths emerged during this heated exchange, it became clear that loyalty was being tested on all sides. The officers were divided, some wanted to take action against the corruption while others feared for their careers and safety. In that moment of revelation, Clara realized how deep the web of betrayal truly ran, not just among the bikers, but within their own ranks as well. Margaret felt shaken. She had always believed in standing for what was right, but now she saw how complicated loyalty could be when intertwined with fear. The confrontation reached a climax as tensions boiled over. Voices rose and accusations flew as both sides struggled to find common ground amidst the chaos of betrayal and uncertainty. What would happen next? Would they be able to unite against both the Steel Scorpions and corrupt officers? As the confrontation between Clara's team and the officers reached a boiling point, the tension in the air was palpable. Just when it seemed that chaos would consume the meeting, a sudden noise interrupted the heated exchange. A loud crash echoed from outside, drawing everyone's attention. The officers paused, their faces shifting from anger to confusion. Margaret, Clara, and their allies exchanged glances, unsure of what had just happened. Curiosity piqued, they all moved toward the door to investigate. As they stepped outside, they were met with an unexpected sight. A local delivery driver had accidentally knocked over a stack of crates filled with colorful soda bottles. The bottles rolled everywhere, creating a chaotic scene of fizzing and splashing. The absurdity of the situation broke through the tension like a breath of fresh air. Laughter erupted from some of the townsfolk who had gathered to see what was happening. The delivery driver, red-faced and flustered, scrambled to pick up the bottles while apologizing profusely. In that moment of levity, Clara couldn't help but chuckle. She turned to Margaret and said, "Well, at least it's not bikers crashing through the door." Margaret laughed too, grateful for the brief distraction from their serious discussions. However, as amusing as the mishap was, it also served as a stark reminder of the risks involved in their undercover operation. Clara knew that while they were trying to gather evidence and confront corruption, there were real dangers lurking just beneath the surface. The Steel Scorpions were not just a nuisance, they were dangerous individuals who would not hesitate to retaliate if they felt threatened. As the laughter subsided and people began helping to clean up the mess, Margaret took a moment to reflect on how quickly things could change. One moment, they were confronting betrayal and corruption. The next, they were dealing with spilled soda and laughter. It highlighted how fragile their situation truly was. Once the chaos outside settled down and everyone returned to their discussions, Clara decided to use this light-hearted moment to reinforce their mission. She reminded everyone that while humor could lighten their spirits, they must remain vigilant about the threats they faced. Margaret felt renewed determination as she listened to Clara speak. They needed to keep moving forward despite the risks involved. The laughter had reminded her that even in dark times, there could be moments of joy that helped them bond as a community. As they resumed their meeting inside, Margaret proposed that they use humor as a tool for resilience. They could create flyers or social media posts highlighting community events where people could come together for fun while also discussing safety measures against potential threats. The group agreed enthusiastically. It was a way to keep spirits high while remaining aware of their circumstances. They began brainstorming ideas for community events that would not only foster unity but also serve as a platform for sharing information about safety and vigilance. What would happen next? Would their efforts lead to stronger bonds within Sunset Valley? As the meeting progressed, the energy in the room shifted from light-hearted brainstorming to a more serious tone. Margaret could see that while laughter was important, the reality of their situation weighed heavily on everyone's minds. The steel scorpions were still a threat, and they needed to act quickly to protect their community before more damage was done. Clara took the lead, reminding everyone that time was of the essence. They had seen an increase in crime and intimidation tactics from the bikers, and it was crucial to stay ahead of them. The group began to discuss specific actions they could take immediately. Margaret proposed organizing a community safety day. It would be an event where residents could come together to learn about safety measures, share their experiences, and strengthen their bonds. They could invite local law enforcement officers who were trustworthy and willing to support the community's efforts. This would not only provide valuable information but also help rebuild trust between residents and law enforcement. The group rallied around the idea, excited about the potential impact of such an event. They began assigning tasks. Anna would handle logistics, reaching out to vendors and organizing activities for families. Lily volunteered to create eye-catching flyers and social media posts to promote the event widely. As they planned, Margaret felt a sense of urgency grow within her. They needed to mobilize quickly before fear took root in Sunset Valley. The longer they waited, the more power the steel scorpions could gain. After finalizing details for the safety day, Clara suggested they also create a neighborhood watch program. This would involve training residents on how to report suspicious activity and look out for one another. The idea resonated deeply with everyone. It was a proactive step they could take as a united front against intimidation. With their plans in place, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over her. They were no longer just reacting to threats, they were taking charge of their safety and reclaiming their community from fear. As they wrapped up the meeting, Margaret looked around at her allies, friends who had become family in this fight against chaos. She knew that together they could make a difference. But she also understood that challenges lay ahead. The steel scorpions would not back down easily. That night, as Margaret locked up the gas station, she reflected on how far they had come. The web of betrayal and intimidation was tightening around Sunset Valley, but she felt ready to confront whatever challenges awaited them. What would happen next? Would their efforts lead to meaningful change before more damage was done? As the days passed, the tension in Sunset Valley reached a boiling point. Margaret and her allies worked tirelessly to prepare for the upcoming Community Safety Day, but they also knew that the steel scorpions were not sitting idly by. With evidence mounting against them, the bikers would be forced to react, and both sides could feel the impending clash looming on the horizon. Clara continued to gather intel, connecting with more residents who had witnessed suspicious activities or had stories to share about encounters with the bikers. The information painted a clearer picture of the Steel Scorpions' operations, revealing their connections not only to local crime but also to deeper networks that extended beyond Sunset Valley. As Clara compiled her findings, she shared them with Margaret and the group. They discussed strategies for using this evidence during the Safety Day event to rally more support from the community. The goal was to expose the bikers' influence and encourage residents to stand together against intimidation. However, as they prepared for their event, Margaret received word that the Steel Scorpions were aware of their plans. Whispers circulated that Jake and his gang were plotting a response, and it was clear that they would not take this challenge lying down. The fear of retaliation hung heavy in the air, but so did a sense of determination among Margaret and her allies. The night before the safety day, Margaret gathered her team for a final meeting. They discussed their roles for the event and how they would present their findings about the bikers. Clara emphasized that they needed to remain vigilant. If tensions were boiling over, they had to be ready for anything. As they wrapped up their meeting, a sense of urgency filled the room. They understood that this was not just an event, it was a pivotal moment in their fight against chaos. The stakes were high, and they could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The following morning dawned bright and clear, but an undercurrent of tension lingered as residents began arriving at the community center for Safety Day. Margaret greeted everyone with a smile, trying to instill confidence in those who might be feeling anxious about the potential for conflict. As people gathered, Clara set up displays showcasing evidence of the 𝗗𝗜𝗦𝗛𝗥 activities. Flyers were distributed detailing safety tips and encouraging residents to report suspicious behavior. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as more people began to arrive. But just as things seemed to be coming together, a group of motorcycles roared into town. The sound echoed through Sunset Valley like an ominous warning. Margaret's heart raced as she recognized Jake leading his gang straight toward the community center. The bikers dismounted and approached with a menacing swagger. Tension crackled in the air as residents turned to watch, fear etched on their faces. This was it, the moment they had all been preparing for. Margaret felt a surge of adrenaline as she stepped forward to confront Jake and his gang. She knew that this clash was inevitable. It was time to stand up for everything they had fought for. What would happen next? Would they be able to hold their ground against the 𝗗𝗓𝗏𝗡𝗏𝗡𝗏s? As the bikers approached, Margaret felt her heart pounding in her chest. This was not just a fight for her community, it was personal. She thought about everything she had worked for, the friendships she had forged, the trust she had built, and the safety of everyone in Sunset Valley. The stakes were higher than ever, and she knew that if they failed, it would mean more than just losing a battle, it could mean losing their home. Clara stood beside her, equally resolute. She remembered her own journey, how she had come to Sunset Valley to make a difference and how much the community had come to mean to her. She thought of the residents who had shared their stories with her, the faces of those who depended on them to stand strong against the 𝗗𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗏s. Clara couldn't let fear dictate their actions now. Anna and Lily were nearby, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. Anna thought about her family and how important it was to protect them from the chaos that threatened their lives. Lily reflected on how far she had come since starting at the gas station, realizing that this fight was not just about her job but about standing up for what was right. As Jake and his gang drew closer, Margaret took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her allies beside her. Each person present represented a piece of the community they were fighting for. She knew they all stood to lose everything if they didn't confront the bikers now. Jake smirked as he surveyed the crowd, his confidence radiating like a dark cloud. He sensed the fear in some, but also recognized the determination in others. This was a moment of truth for both sides. Margaret stepped forward, feeling empowered by the support of those around her. She had fought battles before, real ones, and she understood that true courage came from standing up for others, even when it felt impossible. "Enough is enough," Margaret called out, her voice steady and strong. "We will not be intimidated by you or your gang any longer. This is our town." The crowd behind her stirred with encouragement as they echoed her sentiment. Clara felt a rush of adrenaline as she joined Margaret at the front, ready to back her up. Jake's expression shifted from amusement to irritation as he realized they were not backing down. The tension in the air thickened as both sides prepared for confrontation. Margaret's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. She knew that this clash could change everything for Sunset Valley. It was not just about defeating the Steel Scorpions, it was about reclaiming their sense of safety and unity. As the bikers tightened their formation, Margaret felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. They had each other, and together they could face whatever came next. The stakes were high, but so was their resolve. What would happen next? Would they be able to stand firm against Jake and his gang? As the tension between Margaret and Jake escalated, the community gathered around, their eyes fixed on the impending confrontation. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and everyone understood that this moment could define the future of Sunset Valley. In the days that followed, plans were made for a final showdown against the Steel Scorpions. Margaret, Clara, and their allies met frequently to strategize. They discussed the best ways to confront the bikers while ensuring the safety of everyone involved. Clara shared her insights from her investigations, highlighting key weaknesses in the bikers' operations that they could exploit. They needed to act decisively and with purpose. However, as they prepared for the confrontation, cracks began to appear in their alliances. Some residents expressed doubts about whether they should confront the bikers directly. Fear crept in, and whispers of caution spread among those who had initially been supportive. Margaret felt a pang of frustration. She understood their fears, but knew that backing down would only embolden the Steel Scorpions. Clara felt hurt by their doubts. She had dedicated herself to helping the community and had risked everything to gather evidence against the bikers. Margaret intervened, reminding everyone of how far they had come together. She emphasized that trust was essential in their fight against intimidation and chaos. "We need each other now more than ever," she said firmly. "If we let fear divide us, we will lose everything we've fought for." Despite her efforts to unify them, some remained skeptical. The fear of retaliation from the Steel Scorpions loomed large in their minds, and it was clear that not everyone was on board with a direct confrontation. As plans continued to unfold, Margaret found herself reflecting on her journey. She thought about her military background and how it had shaped her understanding of loyalty and courage. She knew that standing up for what was right often came with risks, but she also believed it was worth fighting for a safe community. With each passing day, Margaret felt a growing sense of urgency. The Steel Scorpions were still out there, and every moment spent debating their next move was a moment lost. She decided it was time to take matters into her own hands. That night, she gathered her closest allies, Clara, Anna, and Lily, and shared her plan for a direct confrontation with Jake and his gang at the upcoming Community Safety Day event. They would use this public gathering as an opportunity to expose the bikers' influence and rally support from residents who might still be on the fence. Clara hesitated, but ultimately agreed that it could be an effective strategy if executed carefully. Anna and Lily expressed their unwavering support. They understood what was at stake and were ready to stand by Margaret's side. As they finalized their plans, Margaret felt a renewed sense of determination wash over her. They would face whatever came next together, even if trust wavered among others in the community. What would happen next? Would their plans lead to a successful confrontation with the Steel Scorpions? The day of the community safety event arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Margaret stood at the gas station, her heart racing as she prepared for what was about to unfold. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of fear. Everyone knew that the Steel Scorpions would not take their challenge lightly. As residents began to gather, Margaret felt a mix of hope and anxiety. Clara, Anna, and Lily were by her side, each of them ready to face whatever came next. They had worked hard to organize this event, and now it was time to put their plan into action. The community center was filled with booths offering safety tips and resources, but Margaret's focus was on the stage where she would address the crowd. She wanted to rally everyone together and remind them of their strength as a united front against the bikers. Just as she was about to step up to the microphone, the unmistakable roar of motorcycles echoed in the distance. The sound grew louder, sending a wave of unease through the crowd. Margaret exchanged worried glances with her allies. They all knew who was coming. Jake and his gang arrived, their bikes rumbling into view as they parked in front of the gas station. The sight of them sent a shiver down Margaret's spine. She could see the defiance in their posture, the way they swaggered toward the gathering like they owned the place. As Jake stepped forward, he surveyed the crowd with a smirk. He clearly relished the intimidation he could wield over them. But this time, Margaret was ready. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, her voice steady as she addressed both her neighbors and the bikers. "Today is about standing together," she declared, her words echoing through the air. "We will not be intimidated by you or your gang any longer. This is our town." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, emboldened by Margaret's courage. Clara stood beside her, ready to support her friend and ally. The bikers exchanged glances, their bravado faltering as they realized that this time, they were facing a united community. Jake's expression darkened as he stepped forward again, attempting to regain control of the situation. He shouted threats at the crowd, trying to instill fear in those who dared to stand against him. But Margaret held her ground, refusing to let his intimidation tactics work this time. As tensions escalated between Jake and Margaret, it became clear that a confrontation was inevitable. The air crackled with energy as both sides prepared for a showdown. Residents began to form a barrier around Margaret and her allies, standing firm against the bikers. But before he could reach Margaret, Clara stepped in front of him with fierce determination. The locals rallied behind her, ready to protect their own. In that moment of confrontation, everything changed. The community came together like never before. Neighbors who had once been hesitant now stood shoulder to shoulder against intimidation. They shouted words of encouragement and solidarity for one another. Margaret felt a surge of strength wash over her as she witnessed this unity unfold before her eyes. She knew that they were fighting not just for themselves, but for everyone in Sunset Valley who had suffered under the Steel Scorpion's reign of terror. As Jake realized he was losing control over his gang and their intimidation tactics were failing, he grew desperate. He shouted orders at his crew, but it was clear that his confidence was waning. In that critical moment, Margaret seized the opportunity. She called out for everyone to stand firm and not back down. The crowd responded with renewed vigor. They would not let fear dictate their actions any longer. What would happen next? Would they be able to hold their ground against Jake and his gang? Only time would tell as Margaret braced herself for this extraordinary climax, a confrontation where courage would clash with intimidation in ways yet unseen, unraveling connections that could change everything for Sunset Valley forever. As the confrontation escalated, the tension in the air was electric. Jake's gang shifted uneasily, their bravado faltering as they faced the resolute crowd. Margaret felt a surge of hope as she saw her neighbors standing firm, united against the threat before them. Just when it seemed that the standoff would reach a breaking point, an unexpected twist occurred. From the back of the crowd, a familiar figure emerged. It was Tom, Margaret's friend and mechanic, who had been watching the events unfold from a distance. He had been hesitant to join the confrontation, fearing for his safety and that of his family. But as he witnessed the courage of his neighbors, something shifted within him. Tom stepped forward, his face set with determination. He had always been a quiet supporter of Margaret's efforts, but had never taken a stand like this before. With a loud voice that cut through the chaos, he called out to the crowd, urging them to stay strong and reminding them that they were fighting for their home. His unexpected presence caught everyone's attention, including Jake's gang. Tom was not just any resident, he was well known in Sunset Valley for his skills and resourcefulness. As he approached Margaret's side, the crowd began to rally around him, emboldened by his bravery. Seeing Tom step up turned the tide in favor of Margaret and her allies. The crowd erupted into cheers, their spirits lifted by this show of solidarity. Jake's expression shifted from anger to disbelief as he realized that their intimidation tactics were failing spectacularly. With renewed energy, Tom joined Margaret at the front of the group. He quickly assessed the situation and began to strategize with her and Clara on how to confront Jake and his gang effectively. His knowledge of mechanics and tools gave them an edge. He suggested using items from the gas station to create barriers and protect themselves if things escalated further. As they prepared for what might come next, more residents stepped forward to support Margaret and Tom. Neighbors who had once been hesitant now found their courage in numbers. They formed a united front against the bikers, ready to defend their community at all costs. Jake's gang began to falter under the pressure of this unexpected alliance. The bikers exchanged nervous glances as they realized they were outnumbered and outmatched by a community that had finally found its voice. Margaret felt a rush of adrenaline as she saw how quickly things had changed. They were no longer just defending themselves, they were taking back their town from fear and intimidation. The energy in the air shifted from one of dread to one of empowerment. As tensions continued to rise, Margaret took a step forward once more, her voice steady as she addressed both her allies and Jake's gang. She reminded everyone present that they were fighting for their homes, their families, and their future. This was not just about standing up against bullies, it was about reclaiming their sense of safety and belonging. The bikers hesitated, sensing that they were losing control over the situation. The tide had turned against them in a way they hadn't anticipated. With Tom's unexpected arrival and the community rallying together, it became clear that this confrontation would not end in their favor. What would happen next? Would this newfound unity be enough to drive Jake and his gang away for good? As the standoff continued, the air was thick with tension, but Margaret felt a spark of hope. The community had rallied together, and their unity was a powerful force against the steel scorpions. She could see the determination in the faces of her neighbors, and it filled her with courage. Jake and his gang were visibly shaken. They had underestimated the resolve of Sunset Valley's residents, and now they were faced with a united front. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado fading as they realized that this time, they might not win. Margaret stepped forward again, her voice strong and unwavering. She called out to the crowd, urging them to stand firm and remind each other of what they were fighting for. This was about more than just a confrontation, it was about reclaiming their town from fear and intimidation. The residents cheered in response, their voices rising in solidarity. The bikers hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Jake's confidence wavered as he sensed that the tide had truly turned against him. In that moment, Margaret felt a rush of adrenaline. She knew that they had the power to drive the steel scorpions away for good. With Tom by her side and Clara supporting her from behind, she felt unstoppable. As the crowd surged forward, ready to confront the bikers, Jake finally realized that retreat was his only option. He barked orders at his gang to back off, but it was clear that their moment of intimidation had passed. With one last glare at Margaret and her allies, Jake turned and mounted his motorcycle. The rest of the gang followed suit, revving their engines in a desperate attempt to save face as they sped away from the gas station. The crowd erupted into cheers as the bikers fled. Margaret felt tears of relief welling up in her eyes as she embraced Clara and Tom. They had done it. They had stood up against chaos and emerged victorious. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Sunset Valley began to rebuild. The Community Safety Day became a symbol of their strength and resilience. Residents came together to share stories of bravery and support one another in their recovery from the chaos they had faced. Margaret reflected on how far they had come. She thought about all the friendships forged through adversity and how fear had been transformed into courage. The bonds among neighbors grew stronger as they worked together to ensure that such intimidation would never return. Clara continued her work with local law enforcement, pushing for accountability and transparency within the department. Together with Margaret and their allies, they laid the groundwork for a safer community where everyone felt empowered to speak out against wrongdoing. As time passed, Sunset Valley began to flourish once more. The scars of their recent struggles remained, but they served as reminders of what could be achieved when people stood together in solidarity. Margaret knew that while challenges might arise again in the future, they would face them as a united community, braver than ever before. Justice had been served that day at the gas station, but more importantly, a new chapter had begun for Sunset Valley, a chapter filled with hope, strength, and an unwavering commitment to protect one another. What would happen next? As the dust settled on the events that had transpired in Sunset Valley, the role of the judge became crucial in understanding the broader implications of the confrontation between the community and the steel scorpions. The judge reflected on the legal and moral questions raised by this extraordinary showdown, recognizing that it was not just a battle between two opposing sides, but a significant moment that tested the very foundations of justice and fairness. In analyzing the events, the judge considered the motivations of all involved. Margaret, Clara, and their allies had fought not only for their safety but for a sense of belonging and community. Their actions were driven by a deep-seated desire to reclaim their town from fear. On the other hand, Jake and his gang represented a darker side of human nature: intimidation, power, and control. This clash highlighted the complexities of human behavior and how personal biases could influence decisions made in moments of crisis. The judge pondered the legal implications of the confrontation. While no laws were broken during the showdown itself, the underlying issues of intimidation and organized crime raised important questions about law enforcement's role in protecting citizens. The community's decision to confront the bikers directly was a response to their frustration with a system that had failed them in the past. This situation underscored a critical theme: when people feel powerless, they may take matters into their own hands, challenging traditional notions of justice. Reflecting on relevant legal precedents, the judge recalled cases where communities banded together to fight against perceived injustices. These cases often involved civil disobedience or collective action against oppressive forces. The judge recognized that while such actions could be seen as necessary in some contexts, they also posed risks, potentially leading to further conflict or legal repercussions for those involved. The judge also contemplated how different perspectives shape our understanding of truth and justice. In Sunset Valley, residents had come together to support one another, but their views on how to achieve justice varied widely. Some believed in working within the system, while others felt that direct confrontation was their only option. This divergence illustrated a fundamental tension within society: how do we balance individual rights with collective safety? As he reflected on these complexities, the judge acknowledged that this case could serve as a learning opportunity for both law enforcement and community members. It highlighted the need for open communication between citizens and police, fostering trust and collaboration rather than fear and suspicion. The judge hoped that this experience would encourage more proactive measures to address crime while respecting individual rights. In conclusion, the judge recognized that while justice had been served in this instance, driving away the steel scorpions, the real challenge lay ahead. Sunset Valley needed to rebuild not just its physical safety, but also its sense of community and trust in one another. The events had revealed both strengths and weaknesses within their social fabric, offering valuable lessons for future interactions with law enforcement and within their own ranks. What would happen next? Would Sunset Valley learn from this experience and find a way to ensure safety without compromising justice? Only time would tell as they embarked on a new chapter, one filled with hope, resilience, and a commitment to uphold fairness in their community. As the dust settled in Sunset Valley, the community began to reflect on the events that had unfolded. The confrontation with the steel scorpions had not only tested their strength, but also brought to light several key takeaways and lessons that would shape their future. First and foremost, the importance of unity became clear. When residents banded together, they found strength in numbers. This collective spirit empowered them to stand up against intimidation and reclaim their town. The experience taught them that working together could create a formidable force against any threat. Another significant lesson was the value of trust. In times of crisis, trust between neighbors and local law enforcement is essential. The community learned that open communication and collaboration could bridge gaps and foster a safer environment. Building relationships based on mutual respect would be crucial for maintaining peace in Sunset Valley. The event also highlighted the need for proactive measures. Residents realized that waiting for help or relying solely on law enforcement was not enough. They needed to take charge of their safety by creating neighborhood watch programs and organizing community events focused on safety education. Empowering individuals to be vigilant and aware of their surroundings would help deter future threats. Additionally, the experience underscored the significance of standing up for what is right, even when faced with fear and uncertainty. Margaret's courage inspired others to find their own voices and take action against injustice. The community learned that bravery comes in many forms, and every individual has the power to make a difference. As they moved forward, residents were encouraged to reflect on their own roles within the community. Each person had a part to play in fostering a safe and supportive environment. They were reminded that small actions could lead to significant change, whether it was reporting suspicious activity, helping a neighbor in need, or simply being present at community gatherings. With these lessons in mind, Margaret and her allies began to plan for the future. They organized workshops to discuss safety strategies and invited local law enforcement officers to participate in open forums where residents could voice their concerns and ask questions. This initiative aimed to strengthen relationships between the community and those sworn to protect them. As they implemented these changes, Margaret felt a renewed sense of hope for Sunset Valley. The scars from their recent struggles would always remain, but they served as reminders of their resilience and determination to create a better future. What would happen next? Would Sunset Valley continue to grow stronger as a community?